Benjamin Beard, welcome back to Kicking the Seat. I thought it was like 2 years ago since last we spoke, aside from our appearance on Horror 101 with Dr. AC recently. But no, it turns out it was February. That's the kind of year that 2023 has been. We talked about Gone with the Wind all these many months ago. And now we're here to talk about your latest book. We talked a little while ago, few years ago now, about The South Never Plays Itself. Very interesting read that we discussed on the podcast, which actually prompted me to want to see Gone with the Wind, and led to that discussion, for which I'm forever grateful. But now we're going to talk about your latest book, The Bad Class. Class of 1984, Bad Boys, The Outsiders, Repo Man, and Other Gems of 80s Trash Cinema. Now, we're also going to talk about one of the movies discussed in the book, which is Bad Boys. How can you call that trash cinema, sir? I don't know. That is a damn masterpiece, which I saw for the first time between yesterday and this morning in preparation for this show. And it's one of those, how the hell have I never watched this movies? But before we get to all of that, how you doing?
I'm fine, Ian. Thanks for having me. I don't think it's trash cinema in the sense that but I do think it's grindhouse and nasty. I think it's a masterpiece too. I think it's one of the best films of the 1980s, and I don't know why more people don't know about it. I think people have movie people have a sense of it being out there because of Sean Penn, but I think it's superb. So, but the title is supposed to be kind of catchy.
Oh, sure. Well, I was thinking about that very thing as far as why don't more people know about it. I think some of the answers are in your book. Reagan, as he was in the 1980s, sort of a central figure and recurring boogeyman in the Bad Class. And that we think about 1980s movies, as you point out in the movie or in the book, as being, kind of teen centric, very optimistic. Even the kind of the edgier John Hughes, like The Breakfast Club, has its, juvenile delinquent kind of, overtones, but still the guy gets the girl in the end. Everyone kind of walks off happy, and they're all friends across these very diverse cliques.
Right.
But when you look at the 80s, there is that kind of a dark shadow, which I think Bad Boys represents. And it's not just like the flip side, like, oh, things don't always work out for the best. It's really, really dark and gruesome and heavy in dealing with a class, several, I guess, classes and strata of people that aren't even mentioned in most of those kind of like glossy John Hughes types of movies. So I guess we can start there. How did you discover Bad Boys, and what compelled you to include that and the other three titles in the book? What was it thematically that drew you to write about these in a book of sort of reviews / essays that incorporate insights into your life and how these movies kind of affected your outlook on the world?
So I started with Class of 1984 because one of my earliest memories is Michael J. Fox getting like stabbed right in the gut in a high school cafeteria. And I must have been, it was on TV. I must have been 7 or 8. And I was convinced for years that that's what high school is like, right? Like people are going to like jam cocaine up your nose in the bathrooms, and knife wielding hoodlums are going to stab you if you get out of line. And it was Michael J. Fox, who I knew from all the other sort of great 1980s movies he made. He's much younger here. So I started with Class of 1984, and during COVID, like everybody, I felt rudderless, and I rewatched it, and I was like, oh man, this movie's even better than I've always loved that movie, but I was like, this movie's even better than I remember. So I was taking notes, and then I was starting to say, wait a minute, I might have like a book here, and it was just going to be about Class of 1984. But then I rewatched Bad Boys, which I've owned forever, and I watched Bad Boys as a kid on either WGN or TBS. It was on TV a bunch it might have been USA when I was like 11 and 12. It was on TV a bunch.
Was it 15 minutes long? Like I can't remember. I can't imagine what a TBS cut of Bad Boys would look like.
Well, I mean, I don't remember what was cut out, but the bulk of the film was there. And there's so then I was like, well, I started taking notes on Bad Boys, And then I was like, wait a minute, Bad Boys came out 1 year after Class of 1984, right? So then all of a sudden I was like, wait, they're both about juvenile delinquents. They're both about the failures of schools in some sense. And then I said, okay, well, let me look and see what came out the next year. And then The Outsiders came out the next year, which is a really important movie in my childhood, right? And I'm like, well, The Outsiders is also kind of about juvenile. So I was like, what the hell's going on here, right? Like, and then I was like just casting my memory out back, and I was like, what movie was on TV that I saw a lot when I was a kid about the same time? And it was Repo Man, which is both of a piece of these other movies and very different. But it still is about ennui and the kind of social failures. It's stranger than the other three. I mean, in ways good and bad, it's much stranger. But so that's, that's sort of how I cobbled them together. And Ian, I don't interrogate myself when I'm writing. I try not to second guess myself. I know this book is kind of strange, but I was like, well, this is what I've got. I've got these 4 movies, and I've got this friendship that went awry, and I've got the kind of early to mid 80s, and I've got Reagan, and I've got my own kind of political shift. And this is the book I'm going to write.
And that definitely, I guess, comes across. I was curious about these 4 movies and seeing these kind of come through, come back onto your radar and rediscovering them. I mean, it's crazy that your first kind of real encounter with Michael J. Fox was in a movie in which he gets shivved. I think my first experience was either Family Ties, Midnight Madness, or High School USA, which was another TV movie, all vastly different from Class of 1984.
I knew him from Family Ties. That's when I saw the movie. I knew him, or I knew who he was. I don't really. This is a very early memory. I think I was 8 or 7. So this is like casting back. In fact, The South Never Plays Itself starts in there saying, like, I like seeded this book in that book saying, like, an early memory was seeing Michael J. Fox stabbed. So he's, it is shocking. And what's really fascinating about it, this has nothing to do with the book, but he is not the most interesting thing in the movie. He's not the best young actor in the movie. In fact, he's pretty forgettable and kind of mediocre. I think he's a great actor, by the way. But watching the movie, it's like, wait a minute, he's the guy who like came out of it as the big star. It's weird. Well, anyway.
Yeah, and full disclosure, I think I've seen 2 of the movies that you discussed in the film and the book now. I keep calling it a movie, but it's a book. I think part of it is because so much of it reads, your descriptions of these films really brought me into the world of these movies you're describing, even though 2 of them I hadn't seen. It's A Crime Against Humanity. I've not seen Repo Man, although I'm told I gotta turn in my critics card essentially if I haven't seen it because it's such a cult classic. But it turns 40 next year, so maybe we'll talk about it.
I would love that. Yeah,
you can be my guide. And I haven't seen Class of 1984. I'd seen The Outsiders. I think, like you, that was sort of a staple of my early childhood. It didn't give me so much a picture of what high school is like, but just kind of like what older teenagers were like when I was, not a teenager yet. I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool and dangerous, except for what happens to Matt Dillon coming out of that liquor store or the convenience store. But with Bad Boys, again, I just seen this for the first time, and it was your, I think, rich description of it that really sold me on, okay, I want to pair this book discussion with a movie. And just the way you described what was going on with Chicago, that's kind of a connection here, of course, but also with this weird tension of Sean Penn and Esai Morales gradually working their way from an inciting incident, looping back around through the kind of the criminal justice juvenile detention system, and coming to a head as they're both imprisoned in the same facility. It's gripping stuff. And you've got the Horowitz character who is Penn's, like 12-year-old cellmate. But as you point out, he's the most dangerous psychopathic person in the entire film. And it turned out to be true. Even though I had read your kind of rich, spoilery descriptions of what happened, it still didn't prepare me for actually watching the movie, which is so harrowing. And again, I don't know why I'd never seen this movie before. And I understand why people might not gravitate toward it because it's very hard to watch, but I feel like it should be still discussed much more than it is. I don't even know if it was critically acclaimed or even noticed when it came out.
I don't think so. I think it got lost when it came out. But so I'll just say to people who are listening, the film starts with Sean Penn, who's a hoodlum in public on the north side of Chicago. He's at a public school. He goes to the same school as another hoodlum played by S.I. Morales, and they don't really like each other, but they don't have like a big thing. But one of Sean Penn's friends overhears it's Cameron from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Here's
a young Alan Ruck who still looks like he's about 25 playing 16.
I know, but it's weird seeing him in this kind of hard noirish movie, this really tough movie. It's weird seeing him, but they overhear of there's going to be a kind of rip off, so they decide to rip off the rip off. In the melee, I won't spoil anything, but Sean Penn, well, I will spoil one thing. Sean Penn kills S.I. Morales' brother and then is sent to a juvenile detention center based on one of the notorious Chicago detention centers. And so he's there, and the movie shifts to like he's in the detention center trying to figure out how to like be, and all of a sudden he's a nobody, and there are these two kind of tough guys who run the detention center. So you have that storyline, and then meanwhile S.I. Morales has decided he's going to get revenge on Sean Penn's girlfriend, played by Ali Sheedy. So that's the kind of setup of the movie. And Sean Penn's roommate is a guy named Horowitz, as you mentioned, who is he's brilliant and very funny, and he's kind of warm to Sean Penn, but he's also he's really scary. He's really scary as you watch the movie, because he doesn't really care about other people, and it's fascinating. And the movie's not really about him, but there's like a movie inside the movie where he's the main character, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of, I can't remember the character's name, but you've seen Near Dark, right? The vampire film from 86.
Yeah.
There's the little kid vampire who's like 11, 12 years old on the outside, but he's actually probably like 100 or something on the inside. And he kind of wears that frustration of like being in between these two worlds. I got that same kind of vibe from Horowitz. He's an old, twisted, messed up soul, but he actually happens to reside in, a 12-year-old's body. And I wonder, what his backstory is. That's one of the fascinating things about this. I mean, we get kind of a story of what's going on with Sean Penn and S.I. Morales, but there aren't any like long drawn out speeches of messed up childhoods or anything from the other inmates. We get to meet a lot of them, but we have to kind of figure out or ask ourselves, how did they end up here? And how much of that is due to, family life versus like early encounters with a system that just kind of like kept passing them through a meat grinder and wearing them down. A lot of fascinating questions in that movie. What was your, I guess, reaction to it? You've seen it, I imagine, a few times over the years. Has your reaction to it changed since the first time you saw it? I mean, obviously you saw it younger, so you might not even be able to grapple
I remember
the ideas. Okay, well, let's talk about the evolution of that in your head.
And I have, I've always, this is an aside, but I always thought I would write a short book on my evolution on Marathon Man, because I've seen this movie dozens of times, and every time I watch it, one time I think it's brilliant and I love it, and then the next time I watch it, I'm like, this movie doesn't make any sense. It's kind of bad. And then I watch it again because I'm brought back to it, and this movie's stunning, right? So Bad Boys, I watched it the first time. I remember now, it was on USA. I think I was 12, and I would sneak around and watch these kind of nasty movies because my mom didn't want me to do that. And my dad didn't really care, but I didn't want to have to justify it to him. Like, he loves movies, but I still would have to be like, oh, I'm watching this for this reason, right? So the first scene, there's a guy in the city I grew up in Pensacola, Florida, so the city already was terrifying to me. There's a guy, a woman in the city, and she's supposed to be from the suburbs, and this hoodlum steals her purse, and then another guy, an adult, sees it and chases the guy who into an alley, and it's Sean Penn, and he cracks him right in the face or in the head with a metal pole or something, or a cudgel. And I was like, this is the first scene of the movie, right? And I was like, I was shocked. I was shocked. The movie just got right to it, and it was so tough and so gross, right? And the movie's really well filmed. That's the thing, right? That's why
Rick Rosenthal, who did Halloween 3 of all,
yeah,
films, yeah,
right. Which or Halloween 2. I don't remember. He did one of the Halloween 2 and Halloween 3 are both really well filmed. Besides that, Rosenthal didn't really do much. I mean, he made a lot of films, but they're not. But he's got a real lean style. But so I saw it, and then I watched most of the movie that night. I got really disturbed by it. I've always actually been, as much as I love movies, they disturb me. So I don't think I finished the movie, or I might have changed the channel and come back to it. And then I watched, no one at school had heard about this movie. And I had one friend, he was more into music than movies, but he also was he knew a lot about a lot. Right. And I said, hey, you seen the Sean Penn movie that was? He hadn't heard it. So I watched it again a couple years later on TV again. And this time I was like 15 or something, or 16. And I was blown away. I was like, this movie is so good. It just like pulls you right in. Right. And so I bought it on DVD when everyone was buying DVDs in the early 2000s. And I watched it again, and I was, this movie just holds up, right? And I've since maybe watched it 3 or 4 times, and each time I get sucked into it. Maybe 5. I might have watched it 10 times total. Each time I watch it, I get pulled into the plot. Each time I'm stunned by the performances, and the visual. There's 2 or 3 like top shelf scenes, right? Like
at least, yeah.
And there's one in particular we'll get to that is unforgettable. And anyone who sees the movie, it's the scene there's 2 scenes you're going to remember, even if, but so I have always thought it was great. Unlike, some movies you come back to and you're like, oh, whoa, right. What did I, or some movies like Back to the Future actually get richer and you realize, oh, this movie is brilliantly conceived and like put together. Right, like that. This movie I thought was great the first time I saw it, even though it disturbed me. Still think it's great, and there's no. I mean, it's a boring answer, I guess, but I love it. I think it's one of the best films of the '80s, and I don't say that with hyperbole.
No, and I'm there with you. Even I'm fresh off seeing it as of 10 hours ago or something. But I gotta ask, because you saw it, 1 or 2 times on TBS, edited for television. When you when you bought it on DVD or something, was that the first time that you'd seen the full R-rated cut? And did any of that extra stuff that not safe for TV, did that increase the impact? Did it change the way you perceive the film, or is it just like, oh, this is kind of what I expected?
Well, I don't know if my memory is going, because the book is partially about my memory too, but I don't know if my memory is like filling in my first viewing with the details. But I remember the fight scenes being very similar, and TBS in particular had a loose editing style. Like they would just like blank out the word. They wouldn't fill it. Some other channels would fill it with other words, which was hilarious. They're like, oh, yeah, you mother salesman. They'd say stupid stuff like that, but not TBS would just go, you mother, right? And you knew what they were saying, so it didn't matter. And in the 80s anyway, violence, unless someone got like decapitated, violence just wasn't, they would kind of show it. Like I saw Predator on TV. I mean, it's basically the same movie. I think Carl Weathers' arm gets ripped off or something, and they just show his arm getting ripped off when I was a kid. So doesn't it get ripped off? Does it get like yanked off? Am I wrong?
I thought it got blasted off. I haven't seen Predator in a while. Yeah, it's been a while.
Right. Well, anyway, that's enough. That's enough Predator for tonight. So our memories of movies are as slippery as our memories of our real lives, right? And so they get really tricky. And I saw this movie Salvador, which is a pretty good movie with James Woods,
Mhm.
80s film. Have you seen it?
No, but I'm familiar with it.
So in it, he goes down to El Salvador. He's based on a real guy. He's a photographer, and he hangs out with Belushi, not the famous one. Not the one on Saturday Night Live? I always confuse
Jim Belushi. John was on
Yeah, so
SNL.
Jim
and
Belushi is in
yeah.
the movie, and in my memories, and this really messed me up as a kid. On TV, there's a bar fight in El Salvador, and Belushi gets like his throat slashed. But I rewatched the movie 15 years later, and it does not happen in the movie. There's a bar fight. Jim Belushi does not get his throat slashed, right? And I was convinced. In fact, I was so disturbed by this change. I was like, well, I don't understand, right? I had it wrong. So anyway, in these, if you don't rewatch these films, they have a tricky. There can be we get them wrong, right? And in this case, I rewatched the movies. I did not interestingly, because I did not rewatch The Outsiders. A, I've seen it 50 times, and B, that movie was the one that backed into what the book is really about, which is about a friendship that like I was sort of ghosted at a young age, and I still don't know what it was about. And so, anyway, yeah.
Actually, I want to talk about that relationship a bit, because that's sort of not a centerpiece, but it casts a shadow over, I think, the entire book. Your relationship with your friend Britt, who were you friends since childhood or just high school, or it seems like a really long lasting
We
relationship
were
up until
friends
it wasn't.
since second grade.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, it's probably like what, about 10 years then?
10, 11 years, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, essentially, not to give everything away, but I mean, it wasn't even really a falling out. It was, as you mentioned, kind of a ghosting back before ghosting was really a thing.
Yeah.
And it seems like it seems safe to say, at least by the end of the book, which is very contemporary, that you still haven't been able to to process that.
I mean, yes. So I don't want to be the kind of person that holds grudges and wishes people ill and has dark fantasies about people suffering who wronged me. But I am sometimes that kind of person. I come from a long line of like Scottish, ill-tempered, brooding hill people. And so in this case, honestly, it's less about forgiveness or anger and more about enigma and confusion and bewilderment and a kind of question mark that hangs over a very important relationship in my life. And I felt at some times I thought I deserved it. I had done something, or that I wasn't cool enough. I internalized it. And then sometimes I felt that he was, I had him wrong, that he, in the book, I hopefully, I sort of artfully, I dip in and out of it, and it unfolds in the book. And now I'm just sort of blathering, but I worked pretty hard to have it kind of be a story, but there is no answer. And if he remembers who I am, which I'm sure he does, but if he remembers who I am, he either has he obviously has a different story, because no one wakes up to be the villain, right? No one's like, I'm going to be the villain today. I'm going to like hurt someone today. Or his version would be, we just kind of drifted apart. So, but I have not forgiven him in any meaningful way. No, Ian, I have not.
It's weird because, as I've mentioned, I think in a couple of our other previous conversations, you and I were about the same age. We have a lot of the same interests, down to like horror movies, comic books, being raised on movies, having all like kind of a strange pseudo-religious background.
Yeah.
And I also have a friend whose name started with a B that ghosted me in high school.
Are you serious?
Yes,
Wait, are
I'm
you
reading this.
serious?
Yes, I'm reading this story and I'm remembering the last time I saw this person. Um, I'd gone over to, this is a digression, but I'd gone over to, visit him one afternoon, and he was like playing guitar up on the balcony of his apartment. And it was like, yeah, I'll see you around. And then I went back like a week or two later because we'd gone to different high schools. And yeah, his house was empty, or his apartment. I knocked on his neighbor's door and they're like, oh, yeah, they moved. I'm like, they moved. We'd been best friends for, I don't know, half a decade at that point. Um, Years later, we caught up and became Facebook friends and social media. And I think we had one or two like passing kind of, remarks or something. But I too, I think what it was, and I'm not trying to tell you how to live your life, but it just like watching the story of you and Britt unfold reminded me of what happened. And I think it was, I was finally given the chance to ask the question. And at that point, I didn't, because I felt like, what the hell difference does it make? We were 15, 16. It hurt a lot. And I think in a lot of ways it kind of resonated. And I still probably carry around some of those scars, where they're buried deep under like, other decades of other scars that kind of
Right.
built on top of it.
Sure.
So I can understand the hurt, but I also wonder, you know, do you think that you will not necessarily ask for forgiveness, which is also a kind of a strange thing to expect from, a 17-year-old kid, because they are by nature
Right.
full of poor judgment. But do you get the sense that you might be able to get some kind of closure, or is that still important to you?
I'll never get closure. We don't have any method of communicating, and we never will, and that's okay. I'll never see him again. I wrote the book in part to process. I mean, I primarily try understand the world through my like writing self. Well, that's not true. I primarily digest and sublimate my feelings about the world through writing.
Yeah.
So, and then I share them uh, to be part of the, human connection. I mean, I don't do it for money or fame, or I mean, I'm not chasing anything. I'm just trying, I want to share, because this is part of my life. And in this case, I think a lot of people have gone through stuff like this. And I think it's really hard to stop being friends with someone who you don't want to be friends with anymore. Right. So on the one hand, I would understand. This case is, in our case, it was tricky because we went to different high schools. He didn't have any friends, and he came into my friend group from my new friend group at my high school, and I was happy to bring him along.
Hmm.
So like all of his friends, except with one or two exceptions, were my friends. And then he switched to a third high school, made some new friends. I knew all of those dudes too. Pensacola is not that big, but like it just started to, I don't know. So uh I mean, I think most likely I was I was not outwardly strange as a person in high school, but I was kind of a strange uh kid, uh and kind of a strange adult, I think. So I think I think like I think I feel very vulnerable right now. But anyway, I think that
Okay.
part of the no, I just think that part of the thing was that he was kind of cool all of a sudden, and I wasn't. To go to a John Hughes kind of world, and I think that is part of it. It just played out in such a strange way. Um,
Yeah.
and the book, if you read it, people, if hopefully a few people will buy it or get it from listen podcasts, because there is like a very haunting thing that happened between us. Weird, right? Uh, Not as weird as your best friend like moving and not telling you. That's the next level. Uh,
Yes.
all right, so let's circle back to Bad Boys, because all right, so in the Sean Penn goes to the juvenile detention center, and his roommate is Horowitz. And these two guys, Viking and Gene, run the place. The
It was
adults,
Tweety, right?
Tweety.
Yeah. Yeah.
The adults let them run the place. Okay. And they sexually assault the other kids. They give them junkie jobs. They're the biggest bullies in the world. One of them I forget the actor's name. It's not slipping my mind, but he's the bad guy in Highlander. So he plays
Clancy Brown.
Yeah, Clancy Brown. Sorry, he plays the bad
Yeah.
guy in lots of stuff. He's amazing. But so the other guy was like in like 2 movies. But so they are running the place, and Sean Penn is slowly working his way up in power inside the prison, the juvenile detention center. And so you don't even remember S.I. Morales at this point, right? It's Tweety and Viking headed for Sean Penn. You're like, what could he possibly do? These guys are stronger than he is. They're bigger. So the best scene in the movie, it comes to a head. They're going to come down and they're going to beat the shit out of it. Okay. And Horace is basically like, what are you going to do? And Sean Penn's like, don't worry about it. So they're upstairs and it's filmed beautifully. And it like films like through the room, and Sean Penn's in his little room, and you can kind of see them starting to head his way. So he takes his pillow out of his pillowcase and he has it like kind of hidden by his side. And he goes to the Coke machine as these 2 guys are coming down.
It's RC Cola, sir.
Sorry.
Much props to the Royal Crown Cola Company. I love that.
So he gets a couple of sodas, and everyone is watching, right? Everyone's watching what's happening, and he puts them into the pillowcase and like kind of ties them in a knot, and no one can really see what he's doing. And then Clancy Brown comes up behind him, taps him on the shoulder, and he says, "Hey, asshole!" And then Sean Penn turns around, wham, and hits him right in the nose, breaks his nose, beats them both to pieces, just beats them up so badly with his Coke cans and this pillowcase. It's such a savage scene, and
it's savage. The thing, the icon of that scene that stuck out to me was the bloody pillowcase.
Yeah,
you see it. It's so red by the end that it almost feels as if it's bleeding from the inside. But you realize, oh, that's all the blood from the people that are now down on the ground, having their knees busted, their faces smashed up, and then later we see the aftermath as they're all kind of messed up. And I like that the film really does, take its time to show us the evolution of actual time, because we see them, they're all bandaged up, they're swollen, and then several scenes later, after a month has passed, you see, oh, they've just got like a little bit of scarring, some like faint red lines,
and they stay away from him after this. And let me say, if you just because I described the scene to you, anyone listening, please go and watch the film. I'm not diluting or spoiling the scene. It is incredible. I mean, I've seen the movie 10, 15 times. Every time I'm like, my heart's racing, and I know what's going to happen, but my mind tricks itself because you don't know. And so, okay, so here's the thing. Another film like this would like Let It Be, right? Would Let It Be. He beats these guys up and they're basically gone. But this isn't that kind of movie. And this is what makes it like rich and strange. 2 things happen. One, and we won't spoil the end, I guess, but S.I. Morales commits a crime and gets sent to the same juvenile detention center as Sean Penn, right? So that's the first thing that happens. So all of a sudden, there's like another beef. 2, Clancy Brown ends up kind of being a roommate with S.I. Morales. I believe they're roommates, but they like team up, right? And then 3, and this is the part that makes the movie so much better than any kind of other movies like it. Tweety gets out. He gets out. You don't even see him leave. He's gone, right? He gets paroled.
No, you just see him. You see him leave. He
but I mean,
walks
you don't
out.
like. It's not like a big thing, right? He's gone. Yeah. So he leaves, and then you learn later he's killed off screen. And Viking Clancy Brown is like devastated by this, and like writes a little poem, and then the other prisoner and shares it in this little class that they have, and the other prisoners laugh at him, and then the teacher says like, hey, why you shouldn't be laughing, and then there's this like sobering moment, and so you're like pushed through all these different feelings about these characters who you hate. I mean, they're like terrible people, but they care for each other. They're in a system that doesn't give a shit about any of them, right? And it's astonishing.
Well, what's fascinating is that the system, writ large, may not care about them. They are treated as, almost commodities. I mean, one of the things I think that it's a brilliant touch, whether this was intentional on the part of the screenplay or just happenstance. Paco, Isai Morales' character, yes, he ends up in the same juvenile detention center as Sean Penn's O'Brien character. Like, okay, yeah, that's a contrivance. But the reason he ends up there is because there's no other place in any of the other juvenile detention centers, in Illinois, apparently, or the greater metro area. And that speaks to, this idea of like, wow, there's such a problem with, crime and juveniles that they're packed in so tight that there's no place else to put them until something opens up down the line, almost like waiting for a hotel room, 6 months later or something. Um, so yeah, it's a moment of convenience that is, accentuated and made to feel real. That you're right. I think other movies would have handled differently or just like kind of let it go. Of course, it's a movie. Of course, they're gonna end up together. No, this felt like an
But
actual situation.
you forget about that. Like you don't, even though it flips back to Paco or S.I. Morales, like you don't really think the movie's heading in that direction, even though of course it has to be. But the way the movie's kind of set up, you almost wonder, is Sean Penn going to see him when he gets out? Or like, I don't know, because it's all about these other characters that you meet once he's in the detention center. And yeah.
Well, what I wanted before I went off on that tangent, what I wanted to say about the uncaring system is yes, there's different layers to it. There's the system.
Right.
There is I guess the kind of the superintendent of the prison who we see a couple of times. He's literally like this middle-aged blonde pipe smoking guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who's completely out of touch, but he's also kind of a hard ass, or at least he wants to think he is. And then
Right.
there's the kind of the COs working under him, particularly Herrera, who kind of becomes a major figure pretty much when Paco shows up, maybe a little bit before then. But he and the other corrections officer, I can't remember his name. He's got the mustache and like
He's from Fame. He's from the movie and TV show Fame.
Okay. But they seem to care about these kids
Right.
and they want
They're
them to
trying.
get
Yeah.
they're trying, but they also realize that they're fighting uphill battle. Like there's a semi-comedic moment when Sean Penn first shows up at the facility and he's seeing this giant chart of offenses and each one has a point system. If you get those points, it adds to your sentence. And one of them is like, no smoking, otherwise it's 500 points. He looks around and everybody in the yard is smoking cigarettes. And there's this underground, quote unquote, smoke trade. But yeah, and I think that last climactic scene with the big prison fight, in which it's not really a spoiler because of course this is where the movie's going, but O'Brien and Paco have it out in the yard, or not the yard, but it's like the central area of the prison, right?
The quad or yeah.
Right. And everybody is like clearing out the tables, making room for them to have this brawl. And the Herrera he's on night watch, but he has been incapacitated in the most brutal, savage way, partly because he's painted as being a three-dimensional character that we actually care about. And we feel that he wants these kids to succeed. So what happens to him feels especially cruel. And when reinforcements do show up, they can't get in to break up the fight because all this furniture has been shoved up against the doors. Nobody has the keys and yada, yada, yada. So that's what makes it, I guess, even harder to watch. And the final scene of resolution between these two characters, I think, is brilliantly shot because it's 2023. I feel like I've seen this move done 100 times in movies since this came out. I don't know if this is the origin of this moment, or this kind of moment. I won't spoil what happens, but it feels like the first time that anyone ever thought to do this. And I'm like, damn it, because either way, until the camera reveals what actually happens, I'm doing a choose your own adventure thing. I'm like, well, if it went this way, oh my God, this is awful. If it went this way, oh my God, that's even worse. But when we find out the resolution, again, I don't want to say how I feel because I feel like that'd be a spoiler, but it's the perfect way, I think, to end this film. Yeah.
I totally agree, and I think like there's no confusion or enigma about how the movie ends. There's no mystery to it, but you the movie's like earned it's earned its conclusion, and the world building is so strong. You can smell the detention center. You can you can see all the rooms and stuff. You can feel it, even though you haven't wandered around in there. And so the like physical space. So what you're talking about when they're closing them, when they're like blocking the guards and they're moving on the stuff, it works because the movie's done such a good job of mapping out the detention center. The only movie one of the only movies I can think of that does such a good was like Ratatouille, The Kitchen in Ratatouille. It's like that. Like that's how they kind of capture the space. And I mean, I riff a little bit in the book about prison movies and juvenile detention movies, and I really like them for this reason. I realize it's like a closed society. It's a finite space. So I think filmmakers can move you in this space, and it's so limited. The tensions are ratcheted up always, and it's like it's like visiting another world. I mean, I've never been in prison. It's like visiting another world, but it seems so familiar. And I like Bad Boys. I don't know if it's the best prison movie ever made. Okay, I'm not really sure I can say it. I've seen a lot of prison movies. It's one of the best prison movies ever made.
Did you ever watch the show Oz on HBO back in the late 90s?
Did, and I had a really bad joke in the book about that show that I took out because I just didn't in a later draft because I thought it didn't work. But
do you want to share it here? Or is it too bad to share?
It's just stupid. It's a pun on
Oh, I love puns.
All right, I said it was peniculus or something like that because there's so many penises in the show. It's stupid. I'm very happy. I'm very glad I took it out. Yes, I watched the first 2 seasons of Oz. One of the lead actors, Leon, is a guy I've always loved.
Yeah. 5 Heartbeats. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think he's a wonderful actor. I don't think he quite got the career he should have gotten. I don't know him. I mean, I don't know, but he's wonderful. And I was drawn to the show for him. Yeah, I don't know. Well, you tell me. What do you think?
Well, I loved Oz. I haven't watched it since the mid to late 90s when it came out, so I have no idea how it holds up. I mean, it's where I first discovered J.K. Simmons, who would go on to be, J. Jonah Jameson,
Sure.
and
he's really
all
scary
that other
in
stuff.
that.
Yeah, he is. And so when he shows up in other roles, like not being the head of a neo-Nazi prison gang, it's kind of surprising. But no, what struck me so that's to say, I don't know how well it holds up now. But watching Bad Boys, which came out, probably 13 years, 14 years before Oz, it seems almost like a precursor to that, because the idea of the Oswald maximum security prison, which short for Oz, is that it's sort of a new, for the 1990s, way of conducting prisons. They've got like a central, almost guard tower post in the middle of what we were referring to as like the inside concrete yard. You've got all these automatic, like electronic buzzer doors. Security is very tight. Security, I think it's because I'd watched Oz. When I'm watching Bad Boys, I'm like, they don't have anything in this prison. It is not locked down.
Count.
And so what happens to Herrera at the end, again, not to give it away, it's not surprising, but I'm wondering if perhaps people who were designing Oz watched Bad Boys and like, we can't let that happen to our prison.
Well, they rely on Tweety and Viking they rely on the prisoners the kids to police themselves a little bit, and they have to. I believe Oz came out of the panopticon concept, right? Which is that you're always being watched. And there's been some theorists who said that's like being alive, in contemporary world, like we're being watched all the time, right?
Yes.
Life in the panopticon, right?
Yeah.
But Oz, Oz has dated okay. I watched it maybe 10 years ago, and I ran out of steam. Honestly, this our discussion isn't about Oz, but it was a little much being in prison with these guys for like 20 hours because
Mm.
I was like watching them in a row. I should probably go back to, I was on the third season or something. But I was I just don't want to be in prison anymore, you know? But yeah, so I think, anyone listening, I'm going to circle back to Bad Boys. It's so ultimately, it is so good. And Class of 1984 is so good. Class of 1984 is a kind of brutal horror adjacent reworking of Blackboard Jungle, where a teacher goes to a school and runs afoul of some tough, like some street tough guys types at the school, and it gets out of hand. But it is so well filmed and clever and mean, and it is trashier, but it's very strong, way better than you would think. And so, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
For me, it was honestly a toss up between watching Bad Boys and then Class of. I'm gonna watch Class of 1984. I just didn't have time to watch it for this show.
I mean, Bad Boys is the better film, I think,
Yeah.
as critically. I mean, if you're approaching it, qualitatively, like the quality of Bad Boys is higher. However, Class of 1984 is excellent, but it is a B movie. I mean, it's a drive-in. But it's superb. And then Repo Man, which you said you haven't seen, let me say, is kind of a love it or hate it movie. It's fully a cult movie, so the tone is all over the place. It has Harry Dean Stanton, so it's already like, people should watch it. But
That's one of Roger Ebert's rules. Yeah, do you know that one?
I didn't know that, but
It's the Harry Dean Stanton M. Emmett Walsh movie or rule, which is if those two actors appear in a movie, it's automatically at least very good.
Well, I agree because I'm halfway through Ordinary People, which I've never seen, for the first time. And again, nothing to do with what we're talking about, but it's famous for beating Raging Bull for Best Picture in 1980, right? And I've always avoided it because I'm like, this like middlebrow movie, I'm never going to watch it. It's really good. It is. If you haven't seen it, it's great. And M. Emmett Walsh is in it. And he's amazing. He plays like a swimming coach or something. And I agree. He's brilliant.
Just like he did in Back to School. What's going on here?
But yeah, so anyway, it's a Repo Man. But let me just say, it's very strange because it's kind of funny. It's satire, but once you get past the satire of like consumerism of early 1980s, the satire gets very strange, and it's not clear what is being satirized or what the movie's really about. And in it, there's a car that most likely has like an alien body in the trunk that is evaporating people who look at it. And the driver of the car is like delusional from radiation or something. And then Emilio Estevez, who's like a street punk whose parents have like given his college money away to a televangelist. He's kind of wandering around Los Angeles or a West Coast city and falls in with these repo dudes and starts repossessing cars. And Harry Dean Stanton is like his mentor, right? So it's a wild movie. It's a quintessential 80s movie in terms of its icons and iconography. It's very strange, and the plot breaks down. But if you like it, it's unforgettable, right? It's unforgettable, and you'll know if you like it pretty quickly. But if you don't like it, you'll be like, "What?" But it's the opposite of Bad Boys. It's at times silly. It's self-aware. It's in ways good and bad. It's high concept. Like he goes to the grocery store and the food is like has cans that just say food. And like he'll go to get a beer and it just says beer. There's like all these white cans of beer, right? And so Yeah, but I end on Repo Man because that was the fourth movie that came out, and it coalesced. Like a lot of the ideas of the '80s do coalesce around this movie, and it is one of the great cult films of the '80s with Blue Velvet and Videodrome. I would argue. I mean, who am I? But
No,
I
no
think
argument there.
I think Blue Velvet and Videodrome are better films. They were, but Repo Man was a kind of a hit. It was kind of a hit, like critical and commercial hit. And the three of them are grappling with similar things. Uh, so I end with Repo Man. I know our time is running, the hour's getting late, Ian, but
No,
I
I
end
got time for you.
so I end the book with Repo Man because with a little epilogue, but because the issues of technology, street gangs, social breakdown, and the kind of every person for him or herself in the '80s, Reagan's kind of thing. I mean, between the lines, his thing, all of that coalesces in Repo Man. And so that movie was even though it's the outlier of the four of them, it kind of, they all kind of come together in a sense in that movie. And so each chapter is the next year.
Well, the book. I'm curious to see how you feel now that you've kind of exercised your kind of adult feelings on these movies, kind of gone back to your childhood and teen years and some of your adult years to kind of really consider how those attitudes, those points of view affected your watching of the movies, how the movies affected you growing up and your worldview. The book ends on a very it's very dour towards the end. There's it
Well,
is
so
not, and it's sort of a almost like a requiem for America or the American dream. And I'm just wondering, is it
there's a reason
is there
why.
an optimism coming out of the book, or are you still kind of down on it? Because I
Well,
ended, I'm like, I wanted to give you a hug.
okay, two things. I wrote it. I finished the draft, that the sort of second draft that went to the publisher in December of 2020 is when I like finished the first draft. Now I revisited and like I did a lot of stuff throughout, like when it started, when they were going through the page proofs and stuff. But so the tone in part was December 2020, which was like really felt like, well, this is the end, right? I
Yeah.
mean, well, something will survive, but it ain't going to be America, right? But that's part of it. I also I do feel I feel like the logical conclusion of like of the Reagan policy, right? I think the logical conclusion of the bulk of his policies, not all of them, and he's, let me say, I mean, in the childhood where I grew up, in my childhood, he was a hero in my house, and I adored him, and I thought he was like the best president. I mean, I thought he was the best
And
president.
your family, I mean, not to spoil what's in the book, but they have an actual
We have
connection to
connections to him. Yes, my
Bush,
family is. In fact,
specifically. Yeah.
my family was long standing. I'm not supposed to talk about it because they get testy. But my family has long standing ties to the Republican Party. In fact, we're like marveled in and knew, not me personally, but knew like Gerald Ford, uh, Nixon, Bush Senior, Reagan. They knew all of them, but. He's now taken on a darker, sinister turn, and so anyway, the logical conclusion, in some sense, is a society where the institutions don't really look out for anybody, right? And that is the story within the story, the movie within the movie, and each of these movies, right? If you had to boil them down, would be something like that, right? Even The Outsiders, because no one gives a shit about the greasers, right? We haven't really talked about The Outsiders, but no one cares about them. The movie cares. We're supposed to care. We're not supposed to give a shit about the socias, but ultimately, no one cares about them at all. And so, I think that I was working through a lot of that, right, in the end. and it was just a dark place when I was writing it. It's a dark time. But I also, Ian, I think my writing persona is more damaged than my like real self comes out. I mean, I don't know, because people say like, "Oh, you're like, you know," I just
Well, that's the thing. Like, you seem okay,
I am
but
okay.
reading the end of that book, I was like, again, I sincerely wanted to give you a hug, and I also want to ask you something because this may be a broader conversation we don't have time for, but I'm curious because you make reference to the fact that you've got like a drawer, and I imagine an actual sliding drawer full
I
of
do sliding drawer. Yeah,
novels, unproduced screenplays, things
mostly
that you have
novels, but
written,
yeah,
right? That you've written, and I think you described some of them are pretty, are very good,
yeah.
but you haven't submitted them to publish yet. What, if I might ask, why?
Well, I used to, and I got really close a couple times. One time in particular, I got really close. I had publishers, agents, but then everyone kind of passed, and uh, I started writing nonfiction because I've been a film critic, and I was like, I love movies. Let me try to share like a book and like have pieces of it unfold, kind of like a novel, right? And so I shifted to I still write fiction, but I shifted to nonfiction, and all of a sudden people will actually read it. Like publishers are like, oh yeah, let me take a look at that. When you have a novel and you send it to a place, it's just silence, right? And so I
Because
never wanted to,
everyone wants to be a novelist. Like, yeah, right.
well,
They probably.
I mean, so I never wanted to be the kind of guy. I made a deal with myself when I was like 20. I started my first novel when I was 19. I made a deal with myself that I would not write one book for 25 years, that I would not do that. It's like a deal I made with myself. I didn't want to be the guy that carried around some 1,000-page novel. And I was capable of that. I could have done that. So instead, I would write novels, and I don't interrogate where they come from, right? I have a historical novella I just finished. It's very weird for me. There's no violence. There's no, there's not much strangeness in it, right? It's relatively straightforward. Very weird for me. I don't know where it came from. I know the emotions that fed into it, but anyway, I I got it. It hurts. It hurts. I mean, who gives a shit, right? But it hurts to write stories. Okay, so it hurts to spend time putting yourself into fictional worlds, and I developed skill. I mean, I passed the 10,000 hours mark a long time ago, and then to have no one, not only for it to like bomb at a publisher, like getting published, but have no one read it. And so I was left with two roads: self-publish or try nonfiction. So I tried nonfiction. I'm considering self-publishing a few things for fun, just for fun, but I still submit sometimes, but I just don't hear anything. And I'm nobody. I told you this before, right? I don't know. I know people, but I don't know anyone in publishing, right? So, and I have two manuscripts at two different publishers being considered right now. I think they're both really good. But I don't have an agent, and I just can't. Novels are weird. And there are a lot of novelists out there. And I'll tell you, anyone listening who writes novels, I'll tell you, you have to be lucky. You have to be on the zeitgeist a little bit. And it really helps to know people. And so those things, it's hard for those things to line up. But yeah, and I probably would have been more successful if I kept rewriting and submitting. If I had submitted one manuscript to 100 places, maybe, right? But maybe not. But anyone listening who writes and has a full-time job, you can either write or like try to find places to submit. And it's the writing is what keeps you healthy in a way, right? So yeah, if you're ever over, you probably never will be. If you're ever over, I'll show you you can't look too closely, but I'll show you my archive. Yeah.
Well, I just, I read that and I just see that you've written, the two books that we've discussed. And I haven't read these books, so I can't judge like, oh, this would be great. People need to read this, or maybe it belongs in the drawer. But no, I read that. I think there's so much potential there. Like the work is already done.
True.
All that's left is the finding a place for it, which I understand is probably a more daunting undertaking than getting the stories out themselves in some ways.
I mean, I have a couple of them are like literary horror, sort of horror adjacent. They're not slasher novels or anything, so they're hard to describe, right? And agents and publishers don't really like hard to describe. I mean, sure, there's publishers out there that do, but like, they want to know what you're doing right away, right? And then I have a few novels based on real people, but like I take a kind of weird spin on them, and that's also can be tricky. And so, like, here's an example, and I know we got to go, but I wrote a novel. I spent about a year and a half writing a novel on Screaming Jay Hawkins. Now I changed his name. He's a soul, blues, R&B singer who had a crazy life, right? And a good story about his life is like he was a voodoo guy on stage. He would like come out of a coffin on stage, right? And one time he had a hammer and a sickle, right? He'd come out. So one time the Drifters nailed the coffin shut for real. They would pretend to nail, but they nailed it for real. So he couldn't get out. So he's on stage and the music's playing and he can't get out, right? He's like trying to get out. And so he finally like breaks through the coffin and starts chasing the Drifters around, trying to hit him for real with a hammer. And the audience thinks it's all part of the act, right? So anyway, I wrote a kind of a complicated story about him, a novel. So I made up the plot, but he's like one of the main characters. And I thought it was great, right? And that I submitted to 1 or 2 places or 3 places and didn't hear anything. And then about a year later, some other fucker published a book on Screaming Jay Hawkins. So I was like, well, that novel's dead. Like there are not gonna be 2 novels coming out about like this about Screaming Jay Hawkins. It's not gonna happen, right? Yeah.
If they can have dueling volcano movies,
Yes, but again, I'm not anybody, right? I don't have like I mean, I'm slowly building, I guess, a small reputation. But so, anyway.
Ben, I'm not gonna try and force you to take those out of the drawer and like send out 1,000 copies. I'm just saying, let me just say, everybody who was anybody started out as nobody.
That's true. All right. Well,
2 things I want to leave you with.
Okay.
Anecdotes. 1, my father worked a few different careers in his life, but the work he was most proud of was teaching basic skills to youths in and out of the correctional system. And that was, and he was also black, which is, I don't know if you knew that about me.
Yeah, you told me. Yeah, we talked about it. Yeah.
Okay. But that's all by way of saying that the couple of classroom scenes when we get, in Bad Boys really resonated with me because in a lot of ways I thought I was watching my dad trying to reach these kids, because he would bring home essays that, he had received, and he said, hey, read this. This is from a kid who's, just got out of, the system, or, did some time and all this stuff. And this is what he thinks about life and all that. And the scene where he passes out comic books because he's trying to teach, broader concepts and right, like reading arcane things to these kids, and they're just not getting. It's like, okay, read these comic books and write a report about what you think, who are the main characters. And that was the first time that anybody passed, because he finally found something that they could relate to or find, aspiration in. So that was really touching. The second thing, I had the occasion to have dinner a couple weeks ago with the actor, now turned filmmaker, Raphael Sbarge, who appeared in Risky Business as the Tom Cruise's friend Glenn. He's the guy who brought the girl over to have sex in the upstairs bedroom.
Yeah, it's a pretty good film too. Yeah.
Oh, I love Risky Business.
Yeah.
It also turns 40 this year, along with Bad Boys.
Okay.
And we were talking over dinner because I asked him, I was like, I had a specific question about Risky Business. I preface it by saying, and it's not about Tom Cruise. And he said, oh, no big deal. So we ended up talking for like a half hour, like Risky Business stories. And he told me that they were filming Risky Business and Bad Boys in the Chicagoland area around the same time. And so Tom Cruise and Sean Penn would always be like running around together the city. And before I watched Bad Boys, I was like, that just seems really like a strange pairing. But now
I
having
love
watched Bad
that.
Boys and how Sean Penn was in that movie, I could just imagine Tom Cruise's happy-go-lucky, like with the sunglasses, like I'm trying to be cool, along with Sean Penn's like brooding method stuff. Like that could be a movie. You should write that.
I would love to see that movie.
But yeah, so the book was a very harrowing experience. It led me to reconsider The Outsiders, discover and love Bad Boys, and really want to see Repo Man and Class of 1984, and to give you a gigantic hug. So in that sense, that's all it needed to do. The Bad Class is a must read. So yeah, thanks for writing it. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me about it. And I'm going to give you some closing words, sir.
Well, thank you, Ian. Let me say, you're very kind, and those are the story about your dad is that hits me. That like hits me. I know what it feels like when you're watching a film and a character like your dad or mom pop up, and like all of a sudden the movie's a different thing, right? But I hope I anyone who wants to read the book, I'll say it's a movie book, but not really a movie book. I mean, it both is and isn't, and it's niche and eccentric, but honest anyway. So it's supposed to be kind of fun too, even though hearing you talk about it, I'm like, maybe I'm too bitter on the page. But
Well, I also wanted to mention the caveat. This is sort of a recurring theme. You do lean, and this is I've mentioned before. You do lean a little bit to the left,
yeah,
just a
well,
little.
I mean, I wasn't okay, but yeah, and I'll finish. Okay,
I
I'll
know
finish with
in
this.
terms of in the pros. I mean, there is Republicans do not come off too kindly in your
Again,
work.
December 2022, right?
Yes.
So where I was writing it, this isn't McCain and Romney that I'm writing about. This is, but I'll say my political evolution, because I was raised um, ultra conservatively as a Southern Baptist in Florida, and then on the other side, there was like a long standing tradition with connection to the Republican Party. It wasn't easy to shift away from those things.
I would imagine not. Yeah.
In fact, there's always a little part of me that's like, I can't believe that I ended up this way. So in my family, there's always tension and disappointment. But I will say, ultimately, I think if you look at Reagan's 80s, which is what I was trying to do in a way, right? It's pretty grim. And you can blame a lot of people for a lot of things. There's a lot of political failure to be spread around. But I believe that he, for his own reasons, he gutted a lot of things that worked for people and helped people. And so, yeah, I'm a progressive guy. I'm liberal. Most writers are. I mean, you have to scour the earth to find a good film critic. There's a handful, but you have to scour the earth to find a good film critic who's like a MAGA Republican. Okay, there's some like Republican film critics. That are good.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, it's not terrain that's trod over very well by ultra conservative writers and thinkers and stuff. But I hope that I'm fair, and I guess I make myself. I think I present myself my own shortcomings too, right? So I'm not speaking down from the mountain. I'm not proclaiming my beliefs like, well, I figured it all out because I'm a sage. And so, it's all marbled together. But anyway, Ian, thank you for having me. I'm talking too much. You're a great guy. And I'm glad that you enjoyed the book. It means a lot because I would hate to waste people's time.
No, definitely not. But yeah, thanks, Ben. We will talk next year about Repo Man and hopefully
For
other
sure.
things, because that sounds awesome and weird and just my kind of thing. So
I would love
thanks
it.
everybody. The Bad Class, buy it wherever fine books are sold. Support Ben and Benjamin Beard. I want you to put out something in the next 5 years.
Fiction.
fiction
Okay.
that I can read and enjoy and evangelize. All right,
All right.
man. Take it easy.
You
I'll
too.
catch you later.